the late 1980s, a young scholar decided to take his skills in his majors of English and mathematics and use them to become a teacher. That teacher would then decide to open shop, and in the late summer of 1987, his debut at Wembley Stadium still sets the record today for over 180,000 people attending his first lecture. That student, that teacher, was not Mr. Finley. There was a lot of enthusiasm and joy when Matt Finley, our own Matt Finley, made Homecoming King last year and was recognized even in Time magazine. Is that the entire story? Hey seniors, it's YB. This is the way we have to kind of get together, and I want to take a time. This is what I would be doing at the end of the year with you in class, but I did want to take some time to talk to you about like next year's course. I know many of you are enrolled in 2332 and 2333 for the fall and the spring of next year. So let me kind of overview that. And one way it's very different than what we took this year in 1301 and 1302, where the course was very much writing centered. Next year's course is going to be very much literature centered. But I don't say that in order to try to scare you off. It's a survey of world literature, which means we have a lot of literature to take a look at that covers really the span of time, everything from the earliest writings of Gilgamesh and early law codes, all the way through as far as we can get to the modern age. Now, the way I approach the literature is it's very rare that you'll get a large chunk or piece of literature to read, like a novel. Instead, because of the nature of a survey course, we're going to take little bite-sized pieces of a lot of different works from a lot of different places. I tend to arrange these things what I call chronothematically. And what that means is we're going to take a look at the course. We'll have a central piece from a particular point in time, like Gilgamesh. And then we will surround it by pieces throughout time as we chart through history that are related or somehow influenced by that piece. So while we may be looking at ancient Babylonia, 3500 BC, you may see us read a piece, from the 1950s that fits with that as well. So we move chronologically but thematically as well. It allows me to cover a great chunk of literature without being tied down to just a straight chronology of it. So for this summer, what I want you to do to prepare yourself for the beginning of the fall are there's some suggested readings. All of them are very short. I've tried to set them up. The longest thing that I have you read will probably take you about 30 minutes to read, maybe 45 if you're a little bit slower reader. So it's not meant to overwhelm you. I want to start by looking at some ancient works, and then we'll throw in some stuff a little more modern. But since we start the year with some older stuff, I want to start by taking a look at Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament. And we'll be looking at chapters 1 through 4. It's one of the great wisdom pieces of literature that we have from the Old Testament. And as you look at it, you may use any version or translation that you have. The one I'm tying you to is the NIV. If you want to use the King James or some other version, you can. You'll see slight differences in the wording, but the general gist of it should remain the same for you. So take a look at that, see what lessons you can draw from that, from Ecclesiastes. And then we'll move on, and the other pieces will include something that should be a little familiar with you. As we did the Truman Show last year, I talked a little bit about Plato's Allegory of the Cave, but now I'd like you to take a look and read it. So the link I've given to you on the website should be fairly usable for you. I think you can get into it pretty well. If you want, as you read it, if you want to imagine the things that were going on in the Truman Show that we watched last year, they may begin to click back to you and begin to make sense. It's one of those great works of literature that's foundational for philosophy. And we'll talk a little bit about how philosophy influences literature, both in the past and in the present. Okay, moving on, there are two sets of law codes that are very brief. One of them is Hammurabi's Code. I want you to take a look at the first 50 or 60 of those. You'll notice they're very short statements. law codes, and I want you to try to wrap your head around ancient Babylonia sometime around 1500 BC. And then we'll follow that with a look at the Old Testament version of the Ten Commandments, which comes from Exodus. Both of these works are considered to be law codes, but I think what you'll see is both of them have influence on modern legal systems as well as modern ethical and moral systems. And they'll be foundational to some other pieces that we'll talk about as well. All right. And then finally, what I want you to take a look at is a Robert Browning poem. We're going to jump forward into the 1800s. And a poem he wrote called Child Roll Into the Dark Tower Came, which I think you'll find appropriately kind of like bizarre, creepy, surrealistic, and even nightmarish. It's a good piece to kind of finalize that summer reading as you go into it. But it allows us a vehicle to begin talking about poetry and the role that poetry can play in great literature. All right, so those will be the works we're covering. Again, they're covered on a handout that's available to you in a lot of different ways. I look forward to seeing you guys in the fall. Hopefully we'll be in a much better situation than we are now. But please take care over the summer, and I'll be in touch. If you have questions, please get in touch with me either through email or, if you want to send me through the Remind, you can as well. But I'll be glad to talk to you and visit and answer any questions that you have.